Now, this isn't going to be easy. I'd like to start by thanking Roger Mugisha for the wonderful introduction. I don't know, therefore, which category do you think you'd fall into? DJ or journalist? It's much more respectable to be a DJ, actually. Believe you me. So, I mean, that's what I'd call myself if I could. Right, yes. So now, to talk about this question of ways of seeing, I should first point out that this is a discussion from a long time ago. Yeah. Looking at the challenge of relevance in our work. Ways of seeing is the first thing that we need to think about. What is news? And the fact that actually, in my view, which is what I hope to try and prove today, that it is news only because we choose to make it so or not. Now, what information and programming do we have inside our own heads as journalists that enables us to decide whether something is news or not? I'm going to try and be very brief. I initially started this discussion. I was asked by the National NGO Forum to talk a bit about media work. And as I shared some of these thoughts with them, and they've asked me, I've now just been asked by Open Society to try and expand on them. The first thing we need to do is look at the 10 Commandments. I would apologize to any of the Muslims in the room, but at least these 10 Commandments, let's not forget they came in the very Abrahamic phase of the evolution of the Abrahamic religions. They come from the prophet Moses. So I'm not doing this as an act of Christianity. In fact, I'm not a Christian. Now, I wanted us to just look at two things and maybe discuss them very, very briefly. I'm quite sure all of you know the 10 Commandments by heart. Nobody? Okay, that's interesting. Well, they form the fundamental thinking that comes out of what is known as Moses the lawgiver. And you all know the story, how he comes down from the mountain and then he has gone through a lot of trouble and mental difficulty to be given these things, and then people are misbehaving and he gets annoyed. But anyway, they remain the fundamentals of what Christians think is the way life should be organized. There are only 10. I'll not read them out. I think some of you have this list with you, and the rest of you have the 10 Commandments in memory. So we can proceed. I'm interested in commandment number 7 and commandment number 10. Commandment number 7 says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Correct? And commandment number 10 says, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant," and so on and so forth. Amongst other things, it assumes that the neighbor is always a man, and that his wife is his property. But nevertheless, there's a question I need to ask. What is the difference in respect to "thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife" and "thou shalt not commit adultery"? I asked somebody and they said, yes, the difference is that because coveting means looking at something in a way that, you want it, wanting something and beginning to look at it and think about it. And so that person insisted that there is therefore a fundamental difference. It is not committing adultery. Okay? But I'm still asking, why are they put separately? Because at least Islam is clear. Islam says that you shouldn't fornicate, full stop. Okay? This one could have maybe said, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor commit an act of adultery with her." And then we would have had 9 commandments. But why did they separate the two? Because in my thinking, Mr. Chairperson, if I am going to commit adultery, which is something you keep reading about in court cases. And this is how you can understand how fundamentally Christian some of our laws are. People keep dragging their spouses to court that they were committing adultery. You read this a lot in the newspapers. People get fined, sometimes nothing happens, and so on and so forth. Okay? So the first assumption is that adultery is something that happens when one of the parties involved is married to another person. Correct? So people understand adultery to mean that if a man sleeps with the wife of another man, or a woman sleeps with the husband of another woman, then an act of adultery has been committed. So then it takes you back to 10. They are saying, they don't say thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's daughter. Although the maid servant and the man servant are off limits, but the daughter is okay, and presumably the son. So I was wondering, the question that eventually came to my mind is that if I am going to commit an act of adultery, which we have all accepted by these general definitions, means I see another man's wife and have sexual relations with her, wouldn't I have to covet her first? Would I decide to commit adultery with a woman I was not attracted to? Maybe if I was trying to hurt the husband. But even then, if you think out the mechanics of it, it could become quite difficult. If the woman was really not your type, how are you going to organize the actual activity? Okay. So this is actually a media studies thing. We're still on the question of media and editing. We're not getting into theology at all. I'm just saying that in my view, it suggests to me that what they are calling adultery is not what we call adultery. Okay? Our understanding of adultery is different perhaps from what was meant in when Moses came down from the mountain, the prophet Moses. So I did a bit of research and I found out a few things. We all know about people also being dragged to court for selling what they call adulterated goods. You know, somebody buys Vim and opens the packets and puts in flour and then sells it on. Somebody else mixes bananas into into ghee and sells it on. Other people mix sand in cement and sell it on. Those are what are called adulterated goods. Goods that have been made impure. Goods whose essential essence has been interfered with, such that it is no longer the good that it was, and it is being misdescribed. If you actually read the 10 Commandments in their original language, which was not English, okay, adultery actually, first of all, only applies to a woman, okay? Because in the Jewish faith at that time at least, it was believed that it is the child of a Jewish woman who becomes a Jew. Does anyone want to disagree? If a woman of Jewish origin produces a child, that child is supposed to also be Jewish. The problem, therefore, for a man who is Jewish is that what if the woman has a child with a man who is not already Jewish? You are now bringing people who are not actually originally Jews. And if you go into, I think it's the book of Isaiah, there are very clear laws within the Old Testament guiding how Jewish people are supposed to behave sexually. And they say, do not go amongst them, do not intermarry with them, and so on. You're supposed to remain pure. So the burden was on the woman, okay? This commandment number 7 is actually directed at women, that don't produce children from men who are not Jews. Because in the process of doing that, you are adulterating. Do you get it? You are adulterating the Jewish race. So the act of adultery is not the act of having sexual relations with another man, but the risk of producing a child who is not actually Jewish. That is precisely why, in my view, you then have to have a second regulation about your neighbor's wife and maid servant and so on and so forth. Because if adultery was sleeping with your neighbor's wife, there would be no need to tell you that, by the way, you should not also even want your neighbor's wife. Because the only reason you'd want your neighbor's wife ultimately would be to sleep with her. Or the only way you'd sleep with your neighbor's wife is if you wanted her first. Welcome to the concept of ways of seeing, okay? Many of you have been baptized and have been going to church for many, many, many years, okay? And you don't understand the meaning of the basic laws of your own religion. Why? Because the people who have been teaching your religion have been teaching it to you in their own particular way, and incidentally in the wrong language, okay? You cannot understand some of these religions if you take them out of the language they were founded in. What is the real meaning of the word Adam? What is the real meaning of the word Eve? Okay? Things like that. One means root, and the other one means the soil in which the root is planted. If you are speaking ancient Hebrew, if you're speaking this language, you can get into it. So now, where does that take us, ladies and gentlemen? I am saying that there's a picture emerging within current civil society. There's a huge growing realization that the concept of the liberalization of the media is not the concept of the freeing of the media. Basically, we were fooled, or we decided to fool ourselves. Why? Because the word liberalization is related to the word liberation. Okay? The word liberal is related to the concept of being a bit freer, having more access, less rules, less restrictions. So when we saw all the things that we saw, and it depends on how old you are and what you wanted to see when you saw it, but from 1986, this government has been very hard on the media. One of the most famous statements, if you go back to February 18th, 1987, at a press conference, the president made the statement that if the media continues to malign the good name of the NRA, I will lock them up under the detention laws, by which he was referring to the 1967 or 68 detention laws, which provided for detention without trial. And indeed, a couple of people did get locked up. There was a man called Kalundi Serumaga, who was detained for a whole year for criticizing the conduct of the NRA in northern Uganda. He didn't go to court. He was jailed for a whole year. Another gentleman called Francis Odida, similar story. He was in and out of prison for the longest stretch was 7 months. The similar kind of thing. This is going back into the 1986, 87, 88. We hear a lot of talk today about the media being clamped down upon and so on. My argument has always been that there's absolutely nothing new in this, okay? I think what is new is the disappointment by those who had the expectation that this shouldn't be happening today. Indeed, it shouldn't, but it is, and the question is why. Now, what it meant was that when in the 1990s they began to talk about liberalizing the media, so private individuals could own media houses, and there'd be a lot more journalist employment. People, I think the mistake we made was to assume that the idea of liberalization was a liberalization of the media, whereas actually it was a liberalization of the right to own a media house. The distinction is very important. It meant that more people could own media houses, but the attitude towards journalism and its contents was going to remain the same, okay? So the freedom was not for you as journalists, the freedom was for the people who are going to own media houses. But we assumed that when they said liberalization, it included even journalists. Well, some people assumed that. So now there's been a lot of soul searching that what is going on. All these laws are being passed and media houses continue to be raided. People get driven out of their professions. People get locked up. Oh, how terrible it all is. And indeed, it's terrible. I have my own personal experiences of it, both in terms of the newspaper that I was running with my brother called Gwanga, which was raided and shut down by the police with a lot of state harassment. I had my own personal experiences which were widely covered by the media. I refuse to talk about them still because I refuse to contribute to creating the idea that we are somehow new and special cases. I say one thing, what happened to me has been happening since 1986, okay? There's absolutely nothing new under the sun. as far as the state's attitude towards the media is concerned. And there I'm quoting from the book of Ezekiel, the first part. There's nothing new under the sun. He didn't know anything about the state of media in Uganda. Now, media ownership has exploded to something like 700% easily. Okay? We have an enormous number of media houses now in this country. It's unbelievable. A study by The Observer a few years ago revealed that in the countryside at least, most of the radio stations that had come into existence were owned by people who were also closely connected to the regime and the ruling party. And they were raising the question that, are these new and different media, or is it the NRM media divided into many, many, many small parts? So in other words, do numbers equal greater freedom? Does a multiplication of media mean a multiplication of the rights of the individual journalists? Okay? If media houses are all reporting on the same thing, which is what happens, okay? And I'm going to give you a few examples. Is there any real value being added by the fact that there are now very many more media houses? Okay? What we were trying to do at Wanga was to bring a different approach to the news, and it was working very, very well. For example, many of our staff were very young, and they insisted that there must be a sports section. They said people won't buy the paper if there's no sports. And in Ugandan media today, unfortunately, sports actually means watching largely the English Premier League and then some of the other European football leagues, which is something that mystifies me up to today. You sit and you watch people in a bar screaming at the TV set. And I once turned to someone and said that you do realize that they can't actually hear you. They're in another country and they don't even understand what language you're speaking. But I think they thought I was being rude. Anyway, so we did things like saying, okay, I said I want to write an article about Barcelona Football Club. And everyone was very shocked. Why? Because I made it clear that I don't think that that type of sports reporting is useful. It sells papers, yes, but is it useful? That's another question. A lot of newspapers have to survive significantly for content in the act of downloading what comes off the internet. Sticking on your own headline, maybe a different photograph, and you filled maybe 1/4 of a page. So I decided to write about Barcelona Football Club and compare it to Express Football Club, which some of you may know was banned during the Idi Amin period, because I think the then governor of Kampala said that that is a club for Uganda. That club is supporting Buganda nationalism, so they banned it. Yeah, Barcelona Football Club. Barcelona is the capital of a federal region of Spain called Catalonia, which during the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s fought and nearly seceded actually from Spain if Franco was going to remain the dictator of Spain. And it is a very strong physical expression of Catalonian nationalism. You see, some of these countries have their own so-called tribes, the way you have tribes here. In Spain, you have Galicia, you have the Basque region, which extends into France. You have Catalonia and other regions. And they say that we are not Spanish. We have our own language and we have our own culture. And the Spaniards are the people further to the south. So I said, okay, that actually is why Barcelona is popular, not because they play good football. They are popular because they are a physical expression of a national ideal. So I said, I'm insisting this is a sports story, and let's run with it. Unfortunately, we did. Instead, what you get at the moment is some of these. Does anyone see anything right or wrong with this article? It's from the Sunday paper, the first day of this month. Okay. There's a picture of different brands of margarine, and the headline says that margarines, okay, which means that there's apparently more than one type of margarine, but margarines can cause brain damage. Then, as the moderator points out, when you get into the subheading and then the article itself, it's actually talking about something called migraines, which is a type of headache. Okay? Now, some of you have worked for newspapers. I should tell you, by the time something appears assembled on a page like this, it has gone through the hands of quite a few people in a normal newspaper. Okay? You have your simple proofreaders, You have your sub-editors, and you have the editor. And then it comes back again, okay? The first clue could have been that what does somebody mean by margarines? Okay, have you ever heard of someone talking about butters? Maybe you can, I don't know. Or sheeps. I don't know, maybe you can. You're making a very, very special point. But you see, these are the things that you look for. The first thing you would say that, why have they said margarines? That's a very unusual way of talking about margarine. Okay, but that one passed. Then it said that margarines can cause brain damage. Now, just as a human being, a lot of people eat margarine and feed it to their children. So if you came across an article in a newspaper telling you that margarine or margarines can cause brain damage, you would imagine, you would say that, wow, I didn't know that. That's serious because I feed my children margarine all the time. Let me read the article and find out what risk I'm putting my children at. And had you read the article, you'd have realized the word was migraines, not margarines. So the fact that the headline remained means that you didn't read the article. That's what it means. You simply went ahead to print it, okay? Then the most beautiful part is that you even then go and get a photograph, okay, of different brands of margarine, which perhaps is how you understand the concept of margarines, okay, and put them there. So in other words, you have become absolutely convinced that the article is about margarine to the point that you even put a photograph. Now, once you decide that tujagenda nga nerigenda, are you getting me? We will just go with what everyone else is going with. You will end up with articles like this. Because you saw it was printed somewhere else, you thought it is worthy of being reproduced. So much so that you couldn't even bother to read it. Why bother to read it? It was already printed, more than some Muzungu publication. Okay? And that is why, therefore, you can't think beyond putting on a headline and continuing, because no one has asked, which is a basic fundamental, is the headline connected to the article? The question didn't arise, and you get into these mistakes. That is why you see, Mr. Chairman, the kind of newsing that we are getting today, and that is my point. I tried to talk about the proliferation of the word is too difficult for Uganda. The many news articles that you have, okay, news houses that you have now. Now, what you then have is that maybe they're 20, maybe they're 30, but you can listen to the news at the top of the hour or open a newspaper, and they're all basically reporting the same thing.